It was some of the teachings of John the Baptist, for example, like the concept of a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. That's referenced in First Enoch, the book of the parables. And I think it's very possible that John the Baptist was a member of that Essene community near the town of Magdala, where Mary Magdalene was from. That's where scholars believe they were from. There's a series of cliffs that were occupied in the 2nd and 1st centuries BC, overlooking the town of Magdala. And it's really cool when you go to Magdala on the tour and look up there, so you see all these holes in the side of the cliff. It's like, wow. So these guys were living up there. And while they were living up there, looking out of their caves and seeing Mount Hermon in the distance, somebody up there 2,000 years ago was writing this stuff about the chosen one, the anointed one, the Son of Man, who would come and bring justice to earth and punish the wicked angels, the wicked kings, wicked landowners, and so on.
Many millennia ago, at the peak of Mount Hermon in the Golan Heights, a group of divine beings known as the Watchers, or Sons of God, descended in an act of rebellion against their king, Yahweh. By teaching them the secret knowledge of the cosmos, they sought to wrestle dominion of the earth away from humanity. They bore children with them, and their offspring were both human and divine. These giants are the demigods of old, and the events that transpired would forever alter the course of human history. At Camp Hermon, we discuss the oddities of the ancient world and their lingering impact on our world today. Welcome.
Hey campers, welcome back to Camp Hermon. This is Tori. I'm here with Chris.
What up, Tori?
We are super stoked to share this week's episode with you guys. A couple quick notes. If you haven't gone to our website, camphermon.com, we have some really cool new merch. What do we have, Chris?
We've got the Giants Are Real shirt, the Nephilim shirt. We've got mugs, stickers, all the things. And one of the great things about the merch is anything you guys buy, it just supports the show. So we love that. Appreciate that.
We've got mugs. You can go get mugged. You can mug your friend.
Yeah.
Send them
and
a Camp Hermon mug.
You know what goes great in a Camp Hermon mug, Tori?
Kevlar Joe's coffee, of course.
Yes. The Bigfoot blend. So you can go to kevlarjoe.com.
It's also available on our website, I believe, right?
No, but if you go on our homepage, there is a link to Kevlar Joe, and we've got a promo code where you can get like 10% off. All the things. Yeah. Guys, all this stuff just helps to support what we're doing with Camp Hermon. So yeah, if you guys feel led, like you want to sponsor the show, support us, get merch, membership, whatever, we appreciate it.
Another awesome way to support us, seriously, is if you guys leave a review or just share our episodes. We love seeing, people will send me on social media. People are tagging us in their stories. It means a lot, and that really goes far for us. So you guys know, social media is, it's a big deal these days, right?
Yep. And guys, on today's show, it's tonight. We record at night. So we always say tonight, but episode ends up dropping in the morning. So that's always kind of weird. But we just got done talking to Derek Gilbert. So the episode you guys are about to hear is with Derek Gilbert, and Tori. He blew my mind. He got into the first book of Enoch.
He gave us like a whole geography lesson on Israel. I really want to go with him and Sharon to Israel. They're going in 2024 and 2025. So if the world hasn't ended yet, I'm going to be saving my pennies for that.
Nice. Awesome. All right. Well, Tori, without further ado, here it is. I'm going to miss their presentations because I'll be on the road Friday night, but I'll get to
Judith is going to come
there. Oh, is she? Awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's gonna be great. Derek, you and Sharon are speaking there, if I'm not mistaken.
We're speaking on Saturday, right?
Okay, perfect. Yeah, I'll be there for that.
So we'll be sharing some of the video that we shot at during our pre-tour expedition with Doug Van Dorn.
Awesome.
And I think, and this is just inspired by an exchange that's been going on for the last 36 hours, 48 hours on Twitter with with a fellow who took offense to me defending the Book of Enoch. And it's inspiring me to dig into more research, because I'm certainly not an expert on the Book of First Enoch, but what I've read has convinced me that Mike Heiser's Reader's Companion for the Books of Enoch should be required reading for all Christians, and that I need to do more of a deep dive into it. Most of us who've heard of First Enoch think, okay, Book of the Watchers, all right, confirms Genesis chapter 6, the narrative tells us what happened to the Watchers, Shemaiah and Azazel, or Azael, and it also reveals some things about the netherworld that we don't read about in the Old Testament that show up in the New Testament. So, I knew that stuff from talking to Mike and interviewing Mike Heiser before he passed. Over the years, the description that we have, this mental image that we Christians have of hell being this underworld place of fire and flame and torment and burning punishment, that's not in the Old Testament anywhere. When you look at the Old Testament, look at the few references that are there to the grave or to Sheol, and it's not in there, but it is in First Enoch. And those first 36 chapters, the Book of the Watchers, probably written in the 3rd century BC, that brings forth this information that is then repeated in the New Testament and validated by Jesus, because he talks about, Gehenna is a place where the fire never dies and the worm, I've forgotten the verse, but essentially confirming that it is a place of fiery torment. But then you get into, and this is something I only stumbled onto about a year ago, 6 months ago, really. The second section of the book of First Enoch, beginning at chapter 37 through about chapter 71, called the Book of Parables, is prophetic, and it is there. And this was written in the 1st century BC, probably in toward the end of the 1st century BC. So just before the birth of Jesus, okay, around the time of the death of Herod the Great. And it describes a messianic character who's called the Chosen One, the Anointed One, and most frequently, the Son of Man. Yeah. Now, there's a mention in Daniel chapter 7 to one like a Son of Man, but he's not given any real definition. He's there at the right hand of the Ancient of Days, and he's given a kingdom, that everlasting kingdom and everlasting dominion, but he doesn't do anything, or at least he's not given any kind of role in Daniel. And so I pointed this out on Twitter, and this guy just started, fighting with me about it. Like, okay, I'm like the guy in that old Monty Python sketch who's willing to pay a £5 note to have an argument. So, and I've learned over 25 years of marriage to Sharon that that's not a good way to maintain a healthy marital relationship. So there are times when it's really not worth the argument. But in this case, for me, it's like iron sharpening iron. Okay, this guy challenges me on something, and I go back and I look and I dig it up. So this is inspiration. For me, this is inspiration to dig in and make sure that I'm right.
Yes.
which is maybe not the right spirit for learning. And so I'm trying to be gentle in my responses, because I don't want to be, that guy who comes across like, hey, because I said it, you should just accept it, because, I don't have scholarly credentials or anything. I just want to see how the pieces all fit together. And when you go back into First Enoch, that second section, the Book of the Parables, you see that not only is this messianic character called the Son of Man, a title that Jesus applied to himself 82 times in the New Testament, is given definition. He's the one who acts as the agent of God's judgment to punish the wicked. That's not in Daniel. That's not anywhere. That's not in any Jewish writing prior to the 1st century BC and the book of First Enoch. So that to me is fascinating, and even more so because it's the consensus of scholars who study this stuff that part of First Enoch was probably written by a community of Essenes, not at Qumran down near the Dead Sea, but a community of Essenes who lived near the town of Magdala on the shore of the Sea of Galilee, within eyesight of Capernaum, where Jesus based his ministry, within eyesight of Bethsaida, where Peter, Philip, and Andrew, the first 3 disciples, lived, within eyesight of Mount Hermon. And so you're thinking, wow, maybe those silent centuries between Malachi at the end of the Old Testament and Matthew at the beginning of the New Testament weren't so silent after all, because there's some legitimate stuff in First Enoch that shows up in the New Testament, which is the whole point of Mike Heiser's book, Reversing Hermon. But then you've got people out there who just don't want to hear that. Say, you're saying that Jesus was inspired by Enoch. No, that's not what I'm saying. Not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that Jesus was teaching things that was not present in any Jewish writing before First Enoch. So maybe whoever wrote First Enoch, and there's multiple authors, because again, those two sections were written years apart, decades apart. Maybe they were getting legitimate divine revelation, or maybe they were just really intense scholars of the Old Testament who dug into the prophecies of Daniel and Ezekiel and Isaiah and Jeremiah and Zechariah and actually fleshed out some things that are not in the Old Testament. It's no different than saying, you can learn a lot of biblical truth by reading the writings of Charles Spurgeon or Francis Schaeffer.
Right.
But we wouldn't say, okay, let's put those in the Bible.
Yeah. It's not canonized, but it doesn't mean it's not true.
Right. The other thing about that book of parables, that second part of Enoch, that's so interesting is the fact that it was written in the north near the Sea of Galilee. And that's where Jesus based his ministry, Capernaum on the north shore of the Sea of Galilee. So the ground had been prepared there. And in fact, this is one of the things I'll be talking about at the Go Therefore conference in July, why we believe Jesus was baptized in the Jordan River north of the Sea of Galilee, not down near Jericho, like everybody seems to think. And, we're running counter not only to the United Nations and the Kingdom of Jordan, which is spending $300 million to develop that site into a tourist place. We have friends of ours who are credentialed archaeologists who defend the location down near Jericho. But I don't think that's the case. Not only that, this location north of the Sea of Galilee is directly below a megalithic monument that looks just like Gilgal Rephaim. 2 miles north of the Sea of Galilee, it looks like Gilgal Rephaim, about half the size, but it's on the bank of the Jordan River. And it's less than half a mile from Bethsaida, where Peter, Andrew, and Philip were their hometown. So it's astonishing. You put that together with this stuff from First Enoch and the prophecies of the coming Son of Man. What did Jesus say at the base of Mount Hermon? Who do people say the Son of Man is? And then he said to Peter, who do you say that I am? That's how he declared his divinity. So, I mean, wow. Fitting all that together is just astonishing.
That's so cool. Man, I'm so excited for July. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you, sorry, and this is off topic, but do you have a go-to answer for Christian? Because I've encountered a lot of Christians who have a problem with, or who aren't even willing to read the Book of Enoch. And to me, it's kind of look, it's, I don't know. As a Christian, it's not like you think if you read something secular, it's going to totally dismantle your faith, right? So why not read it and spit out the bones? If something doesn't, I don't know.
Well, yeah. And this is, again, this is this discourse that I'm having with this gentleman. Trying to explain to him why it's worth at least reading for those sections that help understand better some of the weird sections of the Old Testament, and also some of the things that we find in the New Testament. I know I didn't, even to this day, because like I said, just coming across some scholarship on the book of First Enoch and the book of parables specifically, less than a year ago, it's kind of opening my eyes. Wow, I didn't realize how much I was reading into the Old Testament. I'd always assumed, okay, Jesus, yes, the Son of Man, that's from Daniel chapter 7. But when you look at Daniel 7, there's nothing there about the one like a Son of Man, which in the Old Testament, by the way, that phrase in Hebrew just was a way of saying human one, because that phrase shows up dozens of times in the book of Ezekiel, where the angel is saying, come, Son of Man, and I will show you blah, 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 blah. It's just saying, come on, human, follow me. But this one that Daniel sees, one like a Son of Man at the right hand of the Ancient of Days, who's given a kingdom. Okay, that's the only mention of it. But and again, no specific role in the end times is assigned to him. In First Enoch 37 through 71, this is the one who comes and punishes sinful angels, wicked kings, evil landowners. He's given a specific role, And then in the New Testament, Jesus assigns that role to himself and says, yes, at the coming of the Son of Man, okay, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on this earth? He confirms, or at least his definition of the Son of Man himself in the New Testament is consistent with what we see in 1 Enoch, chapters 37 through 71.
Yeah.
Jude specifically quotes 1 Enoch. 1 Enoch 1, verse 9 is Jude verses 14 and 15. So it is at least inspired enough that you've got that reference. Also, Jude and Peter's references to the angels who sinned being locked up or chained up in gloomy darkness until the judgment.
Yeah.
There's no, in the context of 2 Peter and Jude, it's clear that the sin of those angels was a sexual sin, which can only point to Genesis chapter 6. That's the only place in the Old Testament where we see that taking place. But there's no reference then in the Old Testament what happened to those angels. Genesis 6 doesn't tell us. There's nothing in the Old Testament that mentions what happened to the angels back at those sons of God. What happened to them? Peter and Jude tell us they're in chains in gloomy darkness, and Peter puts them specifically in Tartarus. The word translated hell in 2 Peter 2, verse 4 is Tartarosis. And that description of these entities who sinned being thrown into the netherworld and bound up there, that's in 1 Enoch. So when Christians say we shouldn't look at it, it's weird, it's not scriptural, it's not in the, it's not in the Bible for a reason, but writing under the influence of the Holy Spirit, Peter and Jude confirm aspects of the story from Genesis 6 that are only found, the only Jewish writing in which they're found is 1 Enoch and other Second Temple Jewish literature, but most prominently in 1 Enoch. So, yeah, I get it. It's not. I don't argue that it ought to be in the Bible, even though some of the early church fathers did. But it's clear that the early church fathers had a pretty high opinion of it, because when you read the writings of every early church theologian, every early Christian theologian until the time of Augustine in the early 5th century, Justin Martyr, Irenaeus, Athenagoras, Pseudo Clement, a number of others who I can't even remember off the top of my head. It's clear they had, the consensus was that angels came down, commingled with human women, creating these giants who, when they were killed in the flood of Noah, their spirits became demons.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's not in the Old Testament, but it is in 1 Enoch.
Do you think, Derek, that there's any kind of conspiracy to keep the first book of Enoch out of the canon, or to hide it away? Or
I wouldn't go that far necessarily. I just think that people don't like having their paradigm shifted.
I mean, even going back,
No, I would say that I would say that there are reasons that it is not in the old, that it is not in canon. I mean, there are some things in there about the heights of the giants being, 4,000 ells, whatever that means. I don't think we can confirm that. Certainly, that's not mentioned anywhere in the Bible. So there are probably good reasons the Holy Spirit did not inspire the early church to include it in the canon, although the Ethiopian church did and still does to this day. But like I said, as with the writings of other Bible scholars, I mean, we hold all the respect in the world for Dr. Michael Heiser and The Unseen Realm and Reversing Hermon, but we wouldn't suggest it. But even going back further to guys like Jonathan Edwards and some of the great theologians of years gone by, but we would never suggest that they should be in the Bible either. So that's kind of how I view it. I mean, there's some insights to be gained from this insofar as they help explain things in the Bible. When you get to some of the weird stuff and some of the prophetic stuff, some of the things that Enoch is shown in the netherworld, all we can say from that, okay, this is how Jewish religious scholars in the centuries before the birth of Jesus thought, what they thought about the supernatural realm.
Yeah, it definitely seems like Jesus was at least familiar with Enoch, like if he was taught it growing up, or I don't know. And
Well, I mean, given that he's God, I presume that
He
knew.
probably knew. Right, but he quotes it. I feel like the way that he quotes it is like the people he was speaking to would have been familiar with it. Do you know what I'm saying? Like I feel like it
Well,
was
yeah.
probably just something that was like taught in Sunday school, like.
Well, yeah, exactly. When he says at Caesarea Philippi, who do people say the Son of Man is? He
Mhm.
didn't have to stop and explain
Right.
the Son of Man. They understood the concept.
Mhm.
And it's clear from the responses of the disciples that this was a topic of conversation. Well, some say, Elijah, and some say the Messiah, and some say, so it clearly was something that was on their mind. And it's interesting, again, that concept was really not found in any Jewish writing prior to the end of the 1st century BC, when that second section of the book of 1st Enoch was completed, and completed by a community living near the north end of the Sea of Galilee, where Jesus based his ministry. It's like the ground had been prepared. Gee, that would be really coincidental if we believed in coincidences. I am not a coincidence theorist.
Yeah, same. I know. That's been like my favorite part about diving into all of this stuff is like learning about Mount Hermon, and then like on this rock I will build my church and all of that. Like, I think it's pretty mind-blowing.
It is. And like I said, I can understand why some people aren't comfortable with 1st Enoch. And look, it's not a salvation issue. I mean, you can ignore 1st Enoch and still be saved.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm trying to be gracious in this exchange that's going back and forth on Twitter with this fella, because I'm not trying to, unlike years ago when I would have tried to bludgeon him into submission with my superior intellect. I've learned a little bit since then, which is most importantly that I'm not always the smartest one in the room. It was hard for me to admit, growing up as a kid, thinking I was always the smartest one in class. It's like, I'm not even the smartest one in my house anymore. But this is, I think, the challenge that we have as Christians, and Peter puts it out there, is we're always to be ready to give the reasons for our hope in Jesus Christ, but to do it with gentleness and respect. And, again, like I said, I'm like that guy who's willing to pay a $5 for an argument. I'm not always good about that. And so again, I don't want to be that guy who turns people off by making it appear that I think I'm smarter than I really am. I could be wrong about a lot of this stuff. I mean, there are a lot of things that we speculate about that, and we try to label them as speculation because we might be wrong. The things that we do know for certain is that salvation is by grace alone, through faith alone, in Jesus Christ alone. And that, as Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 15, that this is all about resurrection and who gets resurrected at the end of all of this. And in that, because that is true, and because, as we can document, not just from the Bible, but through the archaeology that's been done in and around Israel, that's a key component of the pagan religions that the Israelites confronted when they moved into Canaan. The cult of the Nephilim, cult of the Rephaim, the spirits of the Nephilim destroyed in the flood. The Canaanites knew who they were, and they were. There are texts that were discovered in the Canaanite kingdom of Ugarit about 100 years ago that confirm this. So it's key. It's not fringe. It's key to understanding the gospel message. This is a long supernatural war about who is still standing after the last trump, us or the bastard children of the rebellious watchers from 10,000 years ago, or whenever the pre-flood era took place.
Yeah, I'm all pumped up.
Hey, the guy that you were arguing, or not arguing, graciously going back and forth with on Twitter, that wouldn't happen to be Ken Ham, would it? Because I saw that Doug Van Dorn had written a lengthy response to a tweet that Ken Ham had made, essentially agreeing with and backing the Sethite view. Are you talking about Ken Ham?
No, Eric? It's not Ken Ham.
Okay.
I saw references to Ken's tweet, and I know that he's got that view of Genesis chapter 6, and all I can say is, well, God bless him. No, it's somebody else. There was someone who'd posted something about just kind of a real snarky comment about Enoch being the book that Paul had in mind when he warned Titus against worthless Jewish myths or something to that effect. And I just responded and said that happens not to be the case. First Enoch was held in high regard by the apostles and the early church. And then somebody else chimed in. And again, this has been ongoing now for a couple of days. I haven't told Sharon about this because Sharon's advice to me on this is just look, just don't look, just drop it, just leave it alone. But again, I find this a motivator, and maybe this is a character flaw on my part, because I want to prove that I'm right, or at least find out if I'm wrong. I don't want to be out there making these claims if I'm sticking my foot in it, which I've done in the past. But I will say that this exchange has kind of inspired me to dig deeper into not just the Book of Enoch, but what scholars think about the Book of Enoch, like Mike Heiser, like George W.E. Nicholsburg, and others who have written on this. There's a whole like subgenre of Second Temple Jewish literature studies just devoted to the books of Enoch. When we say Enoch, we're generally talking about First Enoch. There's a Second Enoch and a Third Enoch, and those were written in the Christian era, and they're pretty weird. And I don't have the time to go into those. But First Enoch, because it is referenced by the apostles, it was some of the teachings of John the Baptist, for example, like the concept of a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. That's referenced in First Enoch, the book of the parables. It's not in the Old Testament. It certainly would not have been welcome by the Essenes at Qumran down near the Dead Sea. They were very, very legalistic. You had to follow all of their rules to be forgiven. The Essenes in the north were a little more gracious, apparently. And I think it's very possible that John the Baptist was a member of that Essene community near the town of Magdala, where Mary Magdalene was from. That's where scholars believe they were from. There's a series of cliffs that were occupied in the 2nd and 1st centuries BC, overlooking the town of Magdala. And it's really cool when you go to Magdala on the tour and look up there, so you see all these holes in the side of the cliff. It's like, wow. So these guys were living up there. And while they were living up there, looking out of their caves and seeing Mount Hermon in the distance, somebody up there 2,000 years ago was writing this stuff about the chosen one, the anointed one, the Son of Man, who would come and bring justice to earth and punish the wicked angels, the wicked kings, wicked landowners, and so on. And then just as they're done, Jesus, John the Baptist are born. And 30 years later, they're teaching that stuff in that same place. There will be a couple of new chapters I hadn't planned on in the book that Sharon and I are working on for later this year.
I was going to ask you if this was going to inspire you to write your next book.
Well, we're already working on it. It's called The Gates of Hell. And so we were already working on that. The Gates of Hell, of course, is a reference to Jesus and the confession of Peter at Caesarea Philippi, the Grotto of Pan. It's where Jesus asks Peter, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter said, "Well, you're the Messiah, the Son of the living God." "Ah, yes, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah." And interesting, he mentions Jonah right there because Jonah 3 days in the belly of the whale. Anyway, I think Jesus knew something that he had not yet disclosed to the disciples at that point. But then he says, on this rock, this 9,200-foot mountain behind me, that is essentially the Canaanite version of Mount Olympus, where all the pagan gods meet. On this mountain, I will build my church, my assembly, and the gates of hell, which is this big cave right over here that everyone knows is the entrance to the netherworld. That the gates of hell will not prevail against my congregation. So we were already working on that, and this stuff is just like, okay, this fits into all of that. The idea that Jesus was baptized north of the Sea of Galilee was something I didn't expect to stumble into. And when I say stumble into it, I think I must have, some angel from the heavenly library or something kind of nudging me in the right direction, because I wouldn't find this stuff on my own. But it's amazing how these pieces fit together. And the baptismal site of Jesus The King James version mentions in John verse 128 that when John was confronted by scribes and Levites sent by the Pharisees in Jerusalem to find out who John is and why he's baptizing this way, John 1:28 says these things happened in Bethany across the Jordan, which means east of the Jordan River. The King James says Beth Abara. In the Greek, the word is Bethania. But in the 3rd century, the early church theologian named Origen went and looked. He traveled to Palestine from Alexandria, Egypt, not Alexandria, Virginia. Alexandria, Egypt, to find Bethany, and he couldn't find it because there is no Bethany east of the Jordan River. So he said it must be this place called House of the Crossing, Beth Abara, which is why the King James still has it Beth Abara in John 1:28 to this day. But this was odd because Origen had admitted in his writings that when you looked at the most reliable and the oldest texts of the Gospel of John, and again, he's writing about 200 years after the resurrection. Origen said, yeah, it is Bethania, but that can't be right because there is no Bethany east of the Jordan River. So it must be this other place. Well, our modern Bibles say Bethany because they went back to the original Greek, the Bethania. But in 1877, an explorer for the Palestine Exploration Fund, a friend of Sir Charles Warren, who found that stone, that inscription inside the temple on the summit of Mount Hermon, a fellow by the name of Claude Conder, was trying to find Bethania, and he wrote that it's probably a transliteration of the Latin name Botania, which was the Latin version of Bashan. So, okay, that moves the baptismal site of Jesus 90 miles north from near Jericho to the north side of the Sea of Galilee, Bashan across the Jordan. Well, that's really interesting because Bashan is covered with megalithic monuments to this cult of the dead. There are more than 5,600 dolmens that have been found in Bashan, that land east of the Jordan River. And as we said, there's this megalithic site very close to ancient Bethsaida. That's like a smaller version of Gilgal Rephaim. It's like 10 miles west of Gilgal Rephaim on the bank of the Jordan River. So, Jesus baptized in Bashan across the Jordan. Interesting. It was like he was declaring war on this cult of the dead right from the beginning of his ministry.
And that just seems to validate what we're talking about as far as this supernatural view of Genesis 6. Yeah, that's awesome. That's got some pretty incredible implications as far as that goes.
Well, and then you take that a step further, and in Matthew 4, he mentions the move of Jesus to Capernaum from Nazareth after John the Baptist was arrested. Beginning of verse 12 in Matthew 4, Matthew quotes from prophecy of Isaiah chapter 9, which is the messianic prophecy that includes that very famous line that we hear every Christmas: unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given. Okay, so Matthew quotes from that in Matthew 4, beginning at verse 12. Now, when he heard that John had been arrested, he withdrew into Galilee. And leaving Nazareth, he went and lived in Capernaum by the sea, in the territory of Zebulun and Naphtali, so that what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah might be fulfilled. The land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, the way of the sea beyond the Jordan. Now, the way of the sea, that's the Via Maris. That's the famous Roman road that led from Egypt up to the Sea of Galilee. And then it traveled up the valley through which the Jordan River flows between Mount Hermon and the Sea of Galilee until you reach the site of ancient Hatzor. And then it branches off to the northeast to go towards Damascus. And of course, beyond the Jordan again means east of the Jordan River. The way of the sea beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. So Isaiah was describing that region in ancient times called Bashan as Galilee of the Gentiles. Now here's the money quote, verse 16. The people dwelling in darkness have seen a great light, and for those dwelling in the region and shadow of death, on them a light has dawned. Now, remember again, Jesus baptized in the Jordan, just north of the Sea of Galilee, at the south end of this valley, between Mount Hermon and the Sea of Galilee. It is surrounded by dolmens on the hills on either side of that valley. It used to be a great big marsh called the Hula Marsh, Huleh. The Israelis drained it in the 1950s to get rid of malaria. So you've got all of these dolmens around this valley through which the Jordan River flowed. And Matthew says that Jesus, moving to Capernaum at the south end of this valley, was bringing a light to people dwelling in the region and the shadow of death. Is that valley through which the Jordan flows the valley of the shadow of death? We think it is. In fact, when we were there with Doug and Janelle Van Dorn, we visited a cluster of dolmens at the north end of that valley near a kibbutz called the Shamir kibbutz. And this is that dolmen with the 50-ton capstone. So, I mean, we were climbing around inside this dolmen with like 100,000 pounds of stone hanging over our heads. That's as much as 2 fully loaded 18-wheel flatbed trailers. And it's like, okay, how did they get this put into place 5,000 years ago?
Yeah.
Archaeologists say that dolmen and that dolmen field around that Shamir kibbutz, there's like 400 dolmens there. That was the center of the ancient dolmen building culture on the Golan Heights and in and around the Hula Valley. So, and it's the only dolmen that's been found north of like Yemen that has petroglyphs on the underside. So, fascinating stuff. We were very excited to find that there is a way for our tour buses to get right up to it. So we're going back there next year.
That's so cool.
So when you're describing this, I'm just imagining King David writing these words, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." And I'm just imagining him going through that valley, just being surrounded by demons, the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim. Man, it's wild.
No, I think you're right, because that area certainly was known. Even in the centuries before David, there are references to that valley and that marsh that was there in some of the Canaanite texts from Ugarit. Because in the Baal cycle, there's at one point where just before Baal confronts the god of death, Mot, and is dragged off to the netherworld, Baal, let's be polite, copulates with a cow. And it's probably in that area. And there's another reference to that marsh in another story where the war goddess Anat takes down a bull. So it was known. Well, and then there's the epic of Akkad, which is a story of a young man who's the son of a king named Daniel. Akkad is given a bow by the craftsman god, a magic bow, and the war goddess Anat wants it. And Akkad says, essentially, you can't give me anything I need. She promises him immortality, says, you don't have that power. And besides, what are you going to do with a bow? You're a girl. Well, here's a pro tip. Never insult the deity who's wearing a belt made of human skulls. That's a bad idea. So she has him killed. And the father, Daniel, goes looking for him. And 3 times in this epic poem, it says, when I find him, I will mourn for him. I will mourn for him, and I will bury him in a tomb for the underworld gods. That's a reference to the Rephaim. It's the cognate in Hebrew would be Elohim Eretz, the spirits of the underworld. Well, 3 times he looks and he can't find him. And finally, the 4th time he finds him and he says, I will mourn for him and I will bury him in a tomb at Kinneret. That's the name of the Sea of Galilee. So, and there are other geographic clues in that poem as well that point to that region. So even as far away as what today is the border between Syria and Turkey on the Mediterranean coast, they knew that there was something connected to the netherworld about that region around the Sea of Galilee, which includes Bashan to the north and east of the Sea of Galilee. This was not something that Moses and the Hebrews invented. This was well known before the Hebrews even moved into the territory. The underworld gods were buried in tombs at the Sea of Galilee and in that region around it. That valley through which the Jordan River runs, surrounded by dolmens on the hills overlooking the valley. The region to the east, ancient Bashan, the kingdom of Og. The Israeli archaeologist who led the survey of the Golan Heights back in the 80s, he wrote in 2014 that we can't even use the term dolmen field to describe clusters of these dolmens anymore, because there are so many of them, we don't know where one ends and the next one begins. For all intents and purposes, the Golan Heights is one giant dolmen field. There are more of them clustered tighter together. I mean, dolmens are found all over the world. There are reports, there are even some here in the United States. There's a bunch in Korea. There's a bunch in the Arabian Peninsula. There's several hundred of them in the Caucasus, 3,000, I think, in the Caucasus Mountains. But between Mount Hermon and the Dead Sea, there's something like 25,000, and about 5,600 of them are on the Golan Heights alone. So this is a big thing. It was well known in the ancient world. Bashan, a name that means place of the serpent, was literally the entrance to the netherworld. And that name applied to dolmens. Scholars have been studying dolmens for about 120 years, 140 years since the first reports came back in the late 19th century. And they still don't have a consensus as to why they were built and what they were used for. But the name derives from a Celtic language, Brittonic, that literally means table. So now take that back.
Whoa.
Chris, yes, now you're seeing the connection in Psalm 23.
Yeah. Yes,
I set all of that up just to set up Psalm 23. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Sharon did a presentation on the 23rd Psalm at a conference we spoke at a church in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, about 2 years ago, spring of 21. And she was teaching on this and explained what dolmens were. And then she got to that line in the 23rd Psalm, and I heard 300 people all go, "Ah!" at the same moment.
They did what I just did.
Yes, exactly. You prepare a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. And man, it is so astonishing when you see that and realize that is when we go back next year. We are going to do that teaching on the 23rd Psalm at that Shamir dolmen with the 50-ton capstone in sight of Mount Hermon.
Didn't David write this when Saul was trying to kill him? Am I off on that? Was he kind of out in the cold, running from Saul, trying to survive during that time period? Do you remember?
I would have to look that up. I don't know. We did visit another site on the northwest corner of that valley, the Hula Valley, which again we believe is literally the valley of the shadow of death. There was a city there that was mentioned in the story of David called Avel Beth Ma'akah, where a rebel against David tries to lead an uprising. It fails. He flees to the very north of Israel to this town, Avel Beth Ma'akah, and David's general Joab follows him there. Now, if you look at a map today, this is very near the village of Metula, Metula, which is just about the northernmost village in all of Israel. It's a little finger of Israel that extends up into Lebanon. And we went there because a scholar by the name of Edward Lipinski, in writing a paper on the abode of El, where did the Canaanite creator god El live? What was the abode of El? And he concluded that it was Mount Hermon. But in going through all of the information that was available to him, and I've had to read that paper like 20 times to get my head around it because it's just so rich with stuff. He mentions that region around Mount Hermon in the northern part of the Galilee is connected to a number of supernatural traditions in Jewish writing. And being a secular scholar, he's not ascribing the influence of the Holy Spirit or anything like this to Enoch or the Bible or any other writing. He's just pointing out that in First Enoch, you've got the Watchers who did what they did on the summit of Mount Hermon. And then Enoch receives in a dream after the Watchers approach him and say, here, take our petition to the Lord of Spirits, and maybe he won't punish us. Maybe he'll let us back up into heaven. And Enoch receives the answer from God in a dream while he's sleeping by the waters of Dan. Okay, well, the waters of Dan. Dan is at the foot of Mount Hermon. We visited Dan. You see the little stream that's running there. That's one of the sources of the Jordan River. And then he delivers God's judgment to the Watchers who are weeping at a place called, and in the book of First Enoch, it looks like it's spelled Abel Main, Abel Main. English, we'd read it and say Abel Main. What is that? Well, Lipinski points out that means, in Hebrew, that's Avel Maim, which means waters of weeping. And then he says this is probably where the Ayun stream descends into the Hula Valley next to Avel Beth Ma'akah, this ancient city. So we're like, okay, can we find that on a map? Oh, look, there's a park there, the Ayun Nature Preserve, and there's the waterfall. So when we went out there early, we had Aaron Lipkin take us there. Actually, one of his tour guides, probably the best tour guide in Israel, Yeshai Avatal. We love Yeshai. And he took us there. So we visited that waterfall, which, according to First Enoch, is where Enoch delivered God's judgment to the weeping Watchers and said, nope, you're not getting back up. Now, again, what does that mean? Did it really happen there? We don't know. But for some reason, the author or authors of First Enoch chapters 1 through 36 thought it was important. You had all of these sites located around Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon, the Watchers descend. The foot of Mount Hermon, Enoch receives his dream. And then a little further west there at this waterfall next to Avel Beth Ma'akah, he delivers God's judgment. Then you've got another Second Temple writing called the Testament of Levi, where Levi is taken up to the summit of Mount Hermon and receives revelation. Okay, what that tells us is that in the minds of Jews living during the Second Temple period, 3rd, 2nd, 1st centuries BC, that region between the Sea of Galilee and Mount Hermon was supernaturally charged. It was important. But like I said, we can also carry that back 1,000 years before that to the writings of the Canaanites, who put events in the Baal cycle and that story about the king whose son was killed by the war goddess at the Sea of Galilee. Why? Why is there this long tradition of supernatural activity in and around the Upper Galilee, the Sea of Galilee, the Hula Valley, Mount Hermon, even extending that further north, because the valley extends up into Lebanon as the Bekaa Valley, where at the north end of that valley, you've got Baalbek with those monstrous stones for the temple of Jupiter. Why did the Romans build the biggest temple to their chief god, Jupiter, in Lebanon instead of, Rome? I don't have an answer for that. All we can do is speculate. What we do know is that it was important then, and it would just be historical curiosity, except that Jesus declared his divinity at the base of Mount Hermon, then climbed Mount Hermon for the transfiguration and, the other stuff, like being baptized there at the south end of that valley. Baptized there, begins his ministry, north end of the valley there, the foot of Mount Hermon, declares his divinity. I think he was making a point, sending a message to the spirit realm.
I'm overwhelmed. You're like a whole encyclopedia. Like I really am.
One of the greatest compliments I ever had, and this is because we respect Steve Quayle so much. I mean, he sometimes makes some very outrageous claims, but he's willing to stake his reputation and his own resources in trying to back those claims up. And for that, I give Steve Quayle all the respect in the world. He once referred to me as an Encyclopedia Gilberticus. Like, I'll own that. I will own that. But anything awesome. I get right, give God the credit, because it's not like we're inventing any of this stuff. And We had a fellow that interviewed Sharon and me a couple of months ago, and we were talking about this stuff with the Valley of the Shadow of Death. And because we've not put out the video that we shot all this video, and we plan to put out a video called The Valley of the Shadow of Death, and it'll be in the book, The Gates of Hell. Again, we pray we can get all this done by the end of this year. And he asked, if it was okay if he shared that information. I mean, are you okay with sharing this? Because, well, he was being very gracious, not wanting to share something that we didn't want released because we hadn't published it yet. And we're like, look, if God has let us see something that's new, it's not so we can build a wall around it and say and charge admission. It's to edify Christians to say, hey, look, the rocks really are crying out. God does not ask us to give him blind faith. The evidence is there. I mean, the things that have been discovered over the last couple of years, like the curse tablet on Mount Ebal at the site of Joshua's altar, showing that Hebrew was a written language centuries before the experts thought it was. In fact, there's another one that's less well known. It's called the Lachish milk bowl ostracon, and an ostracon is just like a broken piece of pottery. Dr. Doug Petrovich wrote a paper on that just a few months ago, showing how that's even older than the curse tablet of found at Joshua's altar. In fact, it was probably dropped by somebody who was in Joshua's army when they sacked the city of Lachish in 1406 BC or thereabouts. Of course, Doug has also written the book, The World's Oldest Alphabet, showing that Hebrew as a written alphabetic language is much older than Phoenician. He takes it all the way back to the 19th century BC. So you got all of this evidence out there that confirms the narrative in the Bible. And we just want to share that with people because we're living in a world that's getting darker and darker. And it's like, look, folks, we don't need to give in to the demands of the world. We need to, again, as Peter writes, we need to be gentle and respectful when we're sharing the hope that we have in Jesus Christ. But we don't need to buy into the worldview that the world is trying to push on us. That, well, I don't want to go down a rabbit trail and get into,
No, go there, go there.
It.
We love rabbit trails.
Hey, you go wherever the Lord is leading you. Seriously,
I just don't want to turn this into a discussion on social issues, but there are worldviews to this day that are not progressive; they are regressive. We saw the topless display on the White House lawn this past week for the Pride Month celebration, and we're supposed to believe that this represents progress. It's progressive to believe that. There are 57 flavors of he, she, ze, zir, whatever. And really, this is just a very old belief. It is a return to the pagan worship of the ancient goddess Inanna, or Ishtar, who was praised in Sumerian hymns for being able to change men into women and women into men. And the men who wanted to serve her in her temple had to, remove parts. So this is really a very old form of worship. As we move farther into a post-Christian society, we are not, Richard Dawkins must just be tearing his hair out because this is not like a Star Trek atheistic world where all of the superstition of religion has been put aside. We're moving back into the old bloody world of the pagans.
And speaking of like Dawkins and those guys that are atheists and evolutionists, like they think that we're evolving and that we're going to eventually be humanity 2.0, and I'm like we're actually devolving. We're not evolving, we're devolving. So to your point, things are regressing and humanity is devolving. On the evolutionary scale, it's like the opposite. It's wild.
No, you're not wrong. There are diseases and autoimmune things that we are suffering now that our ancestors never had to deal with. Part of it may be the chemicals that are being put into our hyper processed foods, but I think some of it too is just genetic stuff. I mean, second law of thermodynamics, things tend to break down toward get less complex, not more complicated. Darwinian evolution argues that we somehow have to reverse the second law of thermodynamics.
Yeah. No, doesn't work at all. Yeah, and the fact that, I mean, like some of the allegedly like smartest minds in the country, like Supreme Court justices can no longer even identify what a woman is.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, are we progressing?
Yeah,
Is that
I know.
progress?
And Johns Hopkins University, which is one of the most respected medical institutions on the planet, just put out a new inclusivity guide for language and no longer refers to lesbians as women. A lesbian, according to Johns Hopkins University now, is a non-man attracted to non-men. Okay, yeah,
that is unbelievable. I just heard you say that. I was just listening to 5 and 10 before this, and I heard that. It's outrageous.
It's astonishing. It's astonishing. But again, it's right, like regressive.
Women's rights.
No, yeah, this is why you get the LGBs who are not really on board with the TQ pluses anymore. They're overplaying their hand. Statistics are showing, surveys are showing that Americans are increasingly opposed to key aspects of the agenda. Having men playing in women's sports. Fewer and fewer people are on board with this idea. The percentage of Americans who believe that there are only two genders. Now, it's still only 66%, which is astonishing, but that's actually up from 59% just 2 years ago. So the trend,
there's a little bit of hope.
The trend is going the wrong way, but it won't be cured until Jesus comes back at the head of that heavenly host. So our mission until then is the same as it's always been, which is to make disciples of all nations. And sometimes that means being willing to engage with people in a loving way who may not hold our same worldview, who may even hate God for whatever reason. And just remember that when they're cursing us, it's not us. They're angry at God. We just happen to represent him. And that's really hard to do. That's not an easy thing to do. My natural tendency as the guy who, pay a $5 for an argument is to try to debate rather than to listen and understand and say, I hear you and I understand why you feel that way. I'm not really good at that. But that is what we are called to. Jesus said to love our enemies. That's hard.
It's really hard. Believe it or not, I'm wired like you. I love a good sparring, verbally, and I know much less than you do. But I'm very fiery, and I really have a hard time. Like, I'm very justice oriented, and the culture has become so aggressive and so militant and in your face that to me it feels like simply to match energy means like a lot of aggression is going to come from me toward, you know what I mean? Right. So like, it just makes it harder to answer gently because it's like, well, you're not being, but I know. So it's something I've been praying about a lot. And like, I think God is like softening my heart a lot. And I'm reading, the wisdom books in the Old Testament. I know a soft answer turns away wrath. And, so I'm really trying, but it's really hard.
I've seen that it happen a few times when somebody's come at me really aggressively. And, my initial response is the one that I delete and then start over. And the soft answer actually has worked. And there are times when it won't, when the person is just, not going to listen and not going to respond positively no matter what. And, Jesus' command to the disciples in that case was, look, if they won't listen to your preaching, then shake the dust from that town, that village, from your sandals as a reproach and move on. Rather than continuing to try to engage. So that's what I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to learn at the age of 61. I'm not the smartest guy out there, and arguing is not always the best way to make disciples.
Hey, I will brag on Chris for a second here because Chris and I butt heads a lot, and like he is just a micro example is, like we will disagree, and Chris actually is so good at the soft answer, and like it just it's so disarming, and I'm like, man, that was so godly of you, and I'm not even mad anymore.
Well, I used to serve warrants and subpoenas, and so I figured out fairly quickly in those times when people were angry and wanted to fight me, that I figure how to they call it verbal judo, trying to like flip the situation verbally to where it doesn't escalate to a physical fight. That combined with the fact that I'm just a big teddy bear, who I'm a lover, not a fighter. Like, I was in the Air Force, my brother was in the Marine Corps, he was a combat vet. I'm like, I don't have that in me. So, can't we all just get along? That's my
Yeah.
No.
And that's really a good attitude to take. The difficulty is balancing that with standing on truth and saying, okay, look, I understand why you feel this way, and maybe there's some issues in your, whatever, that folks may have issues that have led them to a place where they're just angry at God and anyone who stands for God. Balancing that soft answer to turn away that wrath, while at the same time not rolling over and saying, okay, well, yeah, we'll agree that your worldview needs to be embraced and endorsed and celebrated. It's really difficult, but if it was easy, we'd all be doing it already. So,
and it's very difficult when we're talking about conversations online. Almost impossible, I would say.
Yeah.
It's way easier when you're face to face with someone. Like, I used to do like street evangelism when I went to school in Philly, and
whereabouts in Philly?
So I went to school in Langhorne at Philadelphia Biblical University.
Okay.
And I would go down to Temple, and I would evangelize on Temple's campus. It's an open campus, so some people would be students, others would just be people kind of coming through because it's right in the middle of the city. And yeah, I mean, one thing I found, like, if you treat people with dignity and respect, and you love them, not everybody, to your point, some people are they're gonna be angry, they're not gonna give you the time of day, and that's fine. Shake the dust from your sandals. Like, that's really all we can do in those situations. But I found that a lot of people that were a little, hostile, a little bit, as I'm just asking questions and just engaging with them, having back and forth conversation, a lot of people would be like, that's interesting, I haven't thought about it that way. And I wasn't trying to see how many people I could convince to, give their life to Jesus that day on the spot. Usually it was mostly like, obviously, if the opportunity came up, minister, like lead them, all that stuff, just planting seeds, just trying to show them like, hey, Christians aren't these just mean, angry, judgmental people like we can be portrayed to be a lot. That's kind of what my experience has been. Online, complete opposite. I don't even have conversations anymore.
It's probably best. And that's why Sharon's recommendation to me is just to don't engage, don't do this. But hey, you know what? I'm 101st fighting keyboardists. That's
yes, I love that. But you know what? I think it's important too. I actually don't have the patience for the online conversations, because it's just exhausting. I'd rather sit down and have an actual conversation with someone. But I think what's important, Derek, for people that are watching you engaging in that conversation, it's kind of like watching a debate. When you're watching a debate, the two people debating, they're not really trying to change the mind of the other person, because they know they're not going to, right? If you're debating someone that really knows their stuff, it's the people that are watching or listening to the debate. Those are the people that you have an opportunity to influence. So I think there is a place for it. So I'm glad you're doing it. I don't have the energy, because I think people that are going to take the time to read through those responses, if they're on the fence, you never know, which way you could push them positively,
Right. And if they're looking in from the outside and they see you behaving badly, it does not reflect well on our King. If we are ambassadors for our King, we really need to represent him well, and remember that in all things. And sometimes it's hard to do when you want to smite the other guy with the power of 1,000 burning suns or whatever. But
and it's righteous anger.
it's easy to justify it to yourself by saying, well, this is righteous anger. God is on my side, and so I'm right. But that may not be how it's perceived by the other person, certainly, and it may not be perceived that way by people looking in from the outside. So, yeah, I've learned to use multiple drafts of responses to try to soften them a bit. But the other thing too is that is it the best use of my time? Not always. And again, that's, like I said, that's my weakness. Enjoying a good debate, enjoying a good argument. And that is taking time away from other things that I could be doing, perhaps, that are maybe more productive. So.
Well, I think it's good to speak up and stand your ground sometimes. I feel like most believers who I know are a lot more willing to just immediately be like, like, I'm not going to, like, not willing to speak or stand up, especially on social media. And so, yeah, it's definitely have to use discernment. Coming back to Ecclesiastes though, Ecclesiastes 3, a time for everything, a time to tear, a time to sow, a time to keep silence, and a time to speak, a time to love, a time to hate, a time for war, and a time for peace. So I think it's just kind of like, Lord, which time is this? What time is it right now? Like, time to speak, time to keep silent.
Well, in this case, it just, I don't know. And if I'm wrong, then, I ask the Lord's forgiveness, but just this attitude, this very flippant attitude towards First Enoch that prompted my reply in the first case, in the first instance, was a little bothersome to me, because I think that it is a book that we should at least be aware of if we're going to try to understand better what Jesus taught to the disciples. Because again, the disciples were clearly aware of it, Peter and Jude especially. But again, even some of the descriptions that we get of the afterlife and the punishment that awaits people in the afterlife who rebel, those are ideas that are in First Enoch. Now, else, just to be clear, I'm not saying that Jesus got those ideas from First Enoch. Jesus didn't need to get ideas from anybody. He didn't refer back to Daniel to make sure his doctrine was correct. Jesus is the author of the book, so he knows what's right and what's wrong. But the fact that then he was teaching things that are not found in any other Jewish writing prior to the 2nd and 1st centuries BC in the book of First Enoch means we probably ought to look at that and just at least compare that to what we see in the New Testament, because it helps us understand better the worldview of the apostles. I'd like to be able to understand the spiritual realm and the supernatural world the way they understood it, because it's not what's being taught in our churches today. And again, even the early church theologians clearly knew what was in First Enoch, because their understanding of demonology comes right out of First Enoch. So, before we throw that baby out with the bathwater, maybe you should, get the baby out and very gently dry it, powder it, and diaper it, and then throw out the water.
Yeah. Have you read The Bible Jesus Read by Philip Yancey?
I have not.
Okay. I feel like it kind of talks about this. So I haven't finished it, but it's pretty good.
Hey guys, I'd like to shift gears a little bit. I had actually intended on asking this at the beginning of the conversation, but I didn't want to interrupt. It was we jumped right in, and I didn't want to jack up the flow. But Derek, are you familiar with this story out of Las Vegas about when was it? It happened May 1st, but the Las Vegas Police Department just recently released the body cam footage that shows like a green streak in the sky coming down, and then there's a 911 call where this family claims to see these 8 and 10 foot, I think it was 2 creatures, 8 to 10 feet tall. They describe them with big eyes. Are you familiar with that story?
Yeah, I've heard reports of it. I've not had the time to look into it.
All right, now take a look at this Las Vegas police body cam footage from last month. The video shows a green flash across the sky. There it is.
And that came just after a family made a 911 call claiming to see non-humans crashed in their backyard. Okay, we're going to play some of that call and interaction with police.
There's like an 8-foot person beside it, and another one's beside it, and it has big eyes and looking at us.
It was like a big creature.
A big creature?
Yeah, like around 10 feet tall.
I have many questions. The police conducted an investigation for several days. That investigation has since closed and ended with no concrete answers. Okay, so
an 8-foot-tall person,
right?
Big eyes staring at them, flash in the sky.
Well, and the fact that they went through and actually interviewed the people, with a follow-up, that suggests obviously the family thought they had seen something. And so I just wonder if there were I would imagine they've scanned to see if there are other camera positions and vantage points where they could have seen something, but giant question mark, I guess, from that green streak in the sky.
It is fun to speculate.
It is interesting that this is all coming around again as we've got this new whistleblower who's come forward and is disclosing information. It's interesting that the reporters, the journalists who are propagating the story are the same two who broke the story for the New York Times in 2017, Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal, who are well-known true believers in the UFO phenomenon. Now, what happened in Las Vegas? I don't know. I've not looked deeply into it. Is it possible that somehow is connected, that green light in the sky and the 911 call? Possibly. Could be that they're unrelated. Do we have any documentation of the 911 call that these people actually saw? Did anyone else corroborate that information? Not as far as I know. I am skeptical. I mean, when Josh Peck and I wrote The Day the Earth Stands Still back in 2017, it was released the week before Kean and Blumenthal published their article in the New York Times that sort of kicked this whole thing off. It seems like this is a reboot of the official disclosure that they tried to launch in December of 2017. Tucker Carlson, in his first Tucker on Twitter broadcast, which got, I think he's got like 125 million views as of this recording, which is interesting because in the last month before Fox News took him off air, his nightly program got about 3.4 million views per show. So on Twitter, he's doing far better than Fox News ever did with him on the air. He was criticizing the corporate media for not telling us the truth, not telling us important things. And he used this story, the UFO disclosure story, as an example of what they're not telling us. He said, by any rational means, this ought to be the biggest story on Earth, the existence of extraterrestrial life. Tucker's a smart guy, and I agree with a lot of what he says. His third episode, especially on the reason Trump is being prosecuted, is probably the fact that he is opposed to these eternal wars that the United States has gotten itself mired in because they are very profitable. It is selling stuff to propagate these wars. The weaponry, the ammunition, the uniforms, the equipment. It's made the suburbs of Washington, D.C., the wealthiest suburbs on planet Earth. Literally trillions of dollars at stake. Trump threatened that gravy train. That's why he's being railroaded. But I disagree with Tucker Carlson when it comes to the UFO phenomenon. The Tic Tac videos, the USS Nimitz incident that kicked this whole thing off back in 2017. It's clear that Commander David Fravor, the pilot on the F-18 that shot that forward-looking infrared radar video of the craft, saw what he saw, because it was also seen by radar operators on the Nimitz and on the USS Princeton, which is a submarine. It was part of the exercises back in 2004 when this took place. What's really interesting to me, though, when I started digging into this, was finding out that the video that was released back in 2017 with the original version of the story, and then was confirmed by the USS Defense Department, that's legitimate video footage last year. That video had been available on the internet since 2007. So UFO researchers knew about this. Why is it all of a sudden 10 years after the video had been out on the internet on YouTube that this is suddenly a big story? There's a journalist for the New York Post by the name of Stephen Greenstreet who has done some investigative work on all of this disclosure since 2017. And Luis Elizondo, who supposedly was the head of this program, the secret program inside the Pentagon called ATIP. Turns out ATIP never existed, and Elizondo never headed up the program. ATIP was a nickname that was given to the program, if I remember the story right, by Senator Harry Reid when it became obvious that the Pentagon was very unhappy that word was leaking out that they were investigating UFOs. The actual name of the program, I can't even remember, it was some other acronym, AAW something, something. So Senator Reid, the retired senator from Nevada, came up with this ATIP nickname. And Elizondo, who apparently was a DIA agent or officer, retires in October. And then in December, he pops up with this story and on the board of directors of something called To the Stars Academy of Arts and Sciences, which is a collection of people from the Defense Intelligence Complex or the Military Intelligence Complex, which is the way this story has always been handled since Roswell in 1947. Whenever a story like this breaks, the intelligence community has its fingers all over it, controlling the narrative. And so you've got this group called To the Stars Academy that wants to get the information out there about what the government knows about this technology. We want to make this technology available for humans, and we want to do research into zero gravity propulsion and this, that, and the other, and consciousness. Wait, consciousness, that's like a new age concept here. What does that have to do with traveling between the stars? Interesting, you've always got that new age connection, just as it's really curious that all of the contactees since the 1940s have received messages from the Ashtar Command or the Galactic Brotherhood telepathically. It's like, wait a minute, they're so technologically advanced, they've solved the immense engineering challenges in crossing the gulf between stars, and yet they cannot work a webcam. They can't send up a flare. They can't flash their headlights or anything like that to send us a message. It's always some guy getting a telepathic message, and these messages contradict. Are these the ancient gods of Egypt? Are they from Zeta Reticuli? Are they from Venus? Are they from Mars? Are they from Pluto? Why are we getting different messages? And why is it always telepathic? Anyway, I digress. The point to all of this is that this is distracting from something else. And this is the way it has always been since 1947. Yes, it's clear that Commander Fravor and the other men involved in that exercise, the USS Nimitz incident, saw something. Yes, it is undeniable that there were unexplainable lights in the sky that have been witnessed by thousands, if not millions of viewers around the world. And yet to this day, there is not one shred of hard physical evidence that any of these artifacts, especially the ones that this Mr. Grush, the current whistleblower, claims existed. Nobody's seen that evidence. His attorney representing him just gave an interview with the Daily Mail in England and said that he was told of a story where the U.S. military recovered a craft 30 feet in diameter, but when researchers went inside after it was recovered, they found it was the size of a football stadium. Okay. Sounds like he's been watching too many episodes of Doctor Who. I mean, I'm a big fan. Walk into the TARDIS. It's bigger on the inside. Yeah. But then Daniel Sheehan, the attorney for the whistleblower, admits, well, no, we don't have any evidence of this. And no, I can't even tell you when this happened or where it happened. All right. Even if we concede that there are craft like the Tic Tac, which according to reports from the men on the Nimitz and the Princeton back in 2004, traveled at a speed well beyond anything that any known aircraft today can match, like much faster than the SR-71 Blackbird. It doesn't automatically follow that it came from off planet. It only means it's a craft that the observers couldn't identify. Now, why would the government then try to redirect our thinking into say, it must be extraterrestrial? Well, just as in 1947 at Roswell, they didn't want people knowing that there were Nazi scientists who'd been brought out of Germany on the rat lines working for the American government. And it's possible that in the case of these Tic Tac videos or other craft, they don't want us knowing that perhaps the Chinese, perhaps the Russians, or maybe even our own government has developed a craft that is well beyond the capabilities of anything else in the air. I mean, remember the stealth fighter, the Nighthawk, what was the F-117? Didn't exist officially until suddenly it pops up in Gulf War I. Whoa, there we go. Where did that come from? It was only a rumor until it was suddenly not a rumor anymore. So I don't know. There is no hard evidence of extra terrestrial life. We do know as Christians, however, and this is the key point, that we humans have been meddled with for literally millennia by inhuman entities, unfriendly inhuman entities who want to destroy everything that God created and called good.
Boom. Amazing. I think that's a great point to end on. That was fantastic. Derek Gilbert, we appreciate you coming on. So I got to say, we're going to plug all your stuff. View from the Bunker. Love it. Obviously, my favorite thing that you do on there is with our beloved Dr. Judd Burton, Brian Godawa, who's been on the show a couple times. Love him. He's, I've waxed poetic about him before. Love his books. When I was first learning about the Divine Council worldview, stumbling on Heiser stuff a few years ago, I'm like trying to wrap my head around this. And then I was listening to Paranormal, and they mentioned that he was an author. So I looked up his stuff, and I flew through his series, The Chronicles of the Nephilim. And it kind of helped to give me a kind of a picture, in my mind of what all that could have looked like. So love his stuff. Love your work with Skywatch TV, everything that you all are doing with your ministry. Absolutely fantastic. If people want to follow you, where do they need to go?
Best place is probably gilberthouse.org. That's kind of the central hub for everything that we do. Gilberthouse.org. And from there, we link to View from the Bunker, my personal website, Sharon's personal website, Unraveling Revelation, PID Radio, our podcast that started back in 2005. We're doing that again on a weekly basis. All of that linked at gilberthouse.org. And we encourage people that when they're there to click on the link that says Get Our App, because all of our content goes through the app, which brings it into iOS, Android, Amazon Kindle Fire, Roku, Apple TV. And someday, at some point, I or a guest will probably say something that'll get us yanked off YouTube. So even though we get a lot of traction, especially for the Iron and Myth episodes with Judd, Brian, and Doug on YouTube, and we're thankful for that. It's kind of a Mars Hill, a digital Mars Hill. At some point, they'll probably yank the program, yank our channel. And so we just encourage people, okay, if you're watching on YouTube, God bless you. Now take a moment, pause, go get the app, because this program will be there. And the Christian company that produces the app and manages it for us, they will not cancel us. So
awesome.
I've got the app. Yeah. And I just wanted to say thank you so much. I mean, I do not watch the news like on mainstream media. I don't. And I just Skywatch TV, like 5 and 10. And yeah, 5 and 10 is where I get my news. And that's where I tell everyone to get their news too. I'm just turn off that garbage. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Huge fans. I also wanted to pass on the message. Nick Fisher wanted me to ask you if you tried /liked the coffee, the Kevlar Joe coffee.
We have not, but we need to get in touch with Kevlar Joe's because we love our coffee here at Gilbert House. And so, that's the one luxury that we allow ourselves. We've got 3 different coffee makers here, depending on whether we want something fast, we want the really good French press, or if we feel like some Nespresso. We've got lots of coffee here.
Well, we have a partnership with Kevlar Joe. We have it's called the Bigfoot Blend.
Saw that.
and we have one coming out soon. Actually, Nick messaged me today saying it's going to be ready very soon. We have a new blend coming out called Dog Man's Delight.
There you go.
If you will message me a mailing address for you, we'll get you some Kevlar Joe shipped to you.
That would be fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Awesome. All right, Derek Gilbert.
Nick, we need to talk.
Yeah, we're trying to get Nick to come to go there for a conference too.
Oh, that'd be wonderful.
Kind of like a handful of our members, and we'll have a little powwow out there. It'd be really fun. So
absolutely.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Please tell Sharon we said hello and pass along that we're huge fans of her as well.
Thank you. I certainly will. God bless you. I really appreciate it.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Hey, they it came down to top vanity, brought the proliferation of humanity. Ayy, fallen sons of the Most High God took advantage of the planet he made, forming a holy alliance of evil. And look at the daughters of Adam in vain. Then the flood rain came to restore his creational order to how he arranged. But the disembodied spirits of the giants still wanna war, still wanna kill in the core, to see the blood of the innocent spill on the floor.